Welcome to the Amarillo Public Library's YouTube channel. My name is Cynthia, and today we're going to be making paper beads. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing you need to know about paper beads is that making them is addictive. So be prepared for that because they are so much fun to make. I make loads of them and they have some really great benefits that I think outweigh any detractions from paper beads. You can make just about any kind of piece of jewelry that you want. You can make paper beads to manufacture it, and you can use just about any kind of paper. You get junk mail in the mail. You can use one of my favorite things is book covers. I used a book cover for this necklace, was made using that book cover. I made a copy of it before I cut it up because I just like to do that, because if you look at the colors in it, you can see those colors in there, but you would never expect it to have come from a book cover. I also use a lot of magazine ads. I use photos from magazines. I use book pages, which make great beads. But there are some things you need to think about in your paper. And one of them is you're going to need to think about what kind of shape bead you want to make, because if you want a real thin bead, you don't need very much paper. But if you want to make a really fat bead, you're going to need something that's pretty long. That's one of the reasons why I like book covers, because they have bright, pretty colors, and you stretch them out, they're really long. So you can make some nice fat beads. If you don't care too much about fat beads, that's not going to be a big problem. Another thing is the paper thickness. If the paper is thick, it will make a fatter bead than a real thin piece of like magazine paper, a page of magazine. But it will also need to probably have a larger hole size because it will be harder to roll on that when you get started on it. So paper is your first consideration. How long do you want to make your paper? You can use rolls of wrapping paper if you want to. If there's some really pretty wrapping paper that has beautiful colors in it, go for it. It may be a little hard to mark because you're going to have to use maybe something other than a regular ruler. Another thing you're going to need is a ruler, because that will mark off the base width of your bead and also the lines to make one edge to the other straight so that you have nice pretty beads when you're finished. I like to use a metal ruler with a cork backing, but you don't have to. I've also used for longer pieces a yardstick, so you might want to do something like that. But most of the supplies that you need, you'll have around the house, and some of the things like paper will come in through the mailbox. But you can go on ahead, and I've made lots of stuff out of things that have come in through the mail. But you'll need paper, you need a ruler, then you need something to cut your beads with, scissors. Then after that, once you've got all your paper strips, you'll need to go on ahead and find something you want to roll them onto. You don't have to use a special item. I've done a lot of beads on just a little stir stick. It's smooth, it's round, it's easy to slide the beads on and off once I've made them. I've also used this little quilling tool a lot. It has a little slot in it, which makes it easier to make the bead nice and tight. But the problem with quilling tools, and if you want to use them, that's absolutely fine, and I use them a lot, but usually, although some of the barrels are a little bit wider, most of them are about 1 millimeter. So that doesn't leave you a lot of room inside to run stuff through. So you're going to need to think about how big a hole you're going to need your beads to have. because if you have a project in mind, you're going to need to know what you're going to string your beads through. Are you just going to put a little pin through them, in which case 1 millimeter is plenty? If you want to use a thin chain, you might go with 2 or 3 millimeter. If you want to do leather thong or something that you run through, you might want something thicker. If you want, say, ribbon or something like that, you can do that, but you're going to need a slightly larger hole. So you're going to have to find a correspondingly larger instrument to wrap the paper around. So after you wrap your bead onto your paper, you're going to need glue, and you need to have it handy before you start rolling. So I use glue stick a lot. I've used Elmer's. I've used glue pins are great because they don't give you great big blobs of glue, but I've also used Mod Podge. You can go on ahead and squirt a little bit out and use toothpicks to place carefully the glue where you want it. But keep in mind, you're going to be having something, that paper wound on your rod or roll, and you're going to have to be able to hold it still and apply the glue. So come up with something that is easy for you to do with one hand. A lot of times if I'm using a glue stick, I will have the lid not all the way on so it doesn't lose its stickiness, but I can take it off and run the end of the paper across it, and that takes care of it. So that's pretty much the basics of what you need. So let's get started. Okay, I'm going to be showing you 2 different ways to mark and cut beads today, but I'll use those to make 3 different shaped beads, and actually more than 3. So the first one I'm going to be teaching you is the tube bead. Tube beads can be long, they're straight on the sides, or they can be short and be kind of chunky. So, like as you can see, with solid paper or with a photo, you're going to need to mark with your ruler really carefully. And if you're using a book page, you don't need that so much. But if you are using a ruler, you'll need to mark off, decide how wide you want your bead to be. And then you can go on ahead and mark that increment on both edges, on opposite edges of your page of paper. So you can do it every 1/4 inch, you can do it every 1/2 inch, you can do it every inch. This is an inch long bead. I wouldn't go much longer than an inch. You might be able to, but I think if you start getting too long, it's hard to make the jewelry fit on a person's body. Just like with a 1/4 inch is a lot more versatile, the longer you get, the harder it is to find uses for your bead. But now let's get started, and I'll show you how to mark and roll a tube bead. Okay, so the first step that you're going to need to do in making the tube style bead is to mark and cut your paper. One of the things I like to do, because I see it a lot in tube style beads, is using book pages. And you can use magazine pages if you want, but book pages are a little bit thicker and they usually have some interesting words on them. You might want to edit to make sure you do not get any undesirable words on there in case you're giving it as a gift to your grandma or a small child, or not that the child will hate it, but their parents might. So go on ahead and mark off the area of the page that you want to use. I tend to not use the margin areas, but you can if you want to. It's really going to be up to you. I sometimes do use the margin sections as borders. I'll make like little bands or something and have one in the design of the jewelry where it'll match the white tones of the printed portion of the page. And that way I'm not wasting anything. But what you can do is with this, you can go on ahead and say, okay, if you're using, you can either go on ahead if you're using a blank piece of plain copy paper or something that's a solid color, you can go on ahead and just mark off, say, every 3/8 to 1/2 inch. You can do, if you're doing 1/4 inch beads, you can just mark off every 1/4 inch, and you'll do that at the bottom and at the top of this page. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off real quick the section that I want to use, and then one thing I will say, whenever you are using scissors, you can use a paper cutter if you want to, but I think I have more control with scissors. But when you are using scissors, do not cut all the way down to the tip of the scissor. Let it go down to about just before, I'd say about at least a 1/2 inch. And that way you don't have to worry about any misalignment in your scissor tip causing a small tear in your bead. I'm going to get rid of that stuff, and then I'm going to go on ahead and mark this. When you're using printed material, if there's a certain width that you want to use, you can go on ahead and just count the number of printed lines that comes close to what you want to do. So if I wanted to do like 4 lines of print, 4 lines of print, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of print, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of print, and then that way 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you'll do this all the way down. And then what you'll do is you can draw a line between the top and the bottom to make sure that they're straight. Since there are just lines of print, I can go on ahead and just cut along this and make my pieces. So you can do it either way, but that's how. The thing is to make it the same width from one end of your paper strip to the next end of your paper strip. And in this case, it has 2 different columns, so sometimes it's not going to be consistent all the way across, but you can kind of eyeball it. 1, 2, 4. Okay, and that's how you do the cutting portion of your tube bead. Okay, now that you have marked and cut your paper strips for your tube bead, here's how you're going to roll them. Okay, now, before you start rolling your beads, what you're going to need to do is figure out what you're going to string your beads onto. And that's why you need to make sure that whatever you're rolling them onto or stringing through your beads is going to be thin enough to fit through the hole in your beads. So this is a 1 millimeter hole that I used this quilling tool to roll these beads, and these are 2 millimeter holes that I used a plastic stir stick. This will let me run some cord through this and knot the cord in between these little thin beads to make a bracelet. So I'm going to use this. And those I'll use for some other project. These will be ideal for doing something where I'm using a head pin, but we'll get to that in a do-it-yourself jewelry lesson. For now, what you need to know is you'll warm up your paper, and just like with curling ribbon, see how it curls more? The more that you warm it up, and it'll get really curly. And this will help you make a tighter roll on your needle. This is going to be my rod. It's nice and smooth. It's symmetrical and nice and round. And I'm going to get some, I'm going to use not glue stick this time. I'm going to use a glue pen. And what I'm going to do is do a little test roll, and I want to make sure that my edge of my paper is parallel to the end edge of my paper is parallel to the stir stick. And then I can roll it up a couple of rolls. Make sure that it's going straight. And then I can undo it and get it ready to roll for real. And I'm going to get a little bit of glue. And that way it's not going to be in contact with the barrel of my bead that the rod that I'm rolling onto. But this way I can go on ahead and keep it nice and tight and try and keep those edges level and go all the way to the end and put on a little bit more glue and roll it all the way to the end. And this way I like to go on ahead and keep rolling it for a minute to let the glue set. And when I'm done, voila, I have a 2mm hold bead that I will be able to run a cord through. And this is probably going to be, if I did a bracelet, I would put them this way around it. And if I were doing a necklace, I just run some cord or wire through it for these beads and maybe separate them off with something going in a different direction, a different shape of bead. But here you have a tube bead. Now that you've learned to make a tube bead, we're going to try another kind of marking, which will enable you to make either ovals or round beads. You can also make cone-shaped beads, all using this same formula of marking your paper. And then you'll cut them out, and then I'll show you how to roll those. Okay, now to mark an oval, circular, or cone bead is a little bit more complicated. So I'm going to use plain paper so you can see what I'm doing. Normally, and I mean there's nothing wrong with solid color paper, but normally I like to use photographs or graphic book covers or magazine ads and stuff like that, because they throw a whole bunch of colors into the final product and you'd never know what it was originally. But what you're going to do is first is to determine the width you want your base to be. I usually don't go bigger than 1 inch, although I could, but you'll also need to decide how thick you want your bead to be, because if you want, you can either go in this direction or you can roll your beads in this direction. And I think I'm going to go with the shorter, more ovally bead, and I'm going to go with, say, a 1/2 inch wide base. And I'm just doing that so you can see this a little bit better. So I'm going to get my ruler, and I'm going to start off by marking a 1/4 inch on one edge. And you're like, no, you said you were doing 1/2 inch. Yeah, but I want my beads to be symmetrical, which means I want them to come up from a 1/4 inch in on either side up to a point. So that means I'm going to have to come in on a 1/4 inch on one edge and start off at the very corner on the other edge, so that when I cut them, they will be, the long sides of the triangle will be symmetrical, or as least symmetrical as I can make them. So I've done an 1/4 inch. Now I'm going to do every 1/2 inch from that point on, and just do a little tick. And you don't have to do the same width, the whole piece of paper. You can, but you don't have to. I'm just going to do a few so you can see what this is going to look like. I'm going to turn this around so that I can see what I'm doing. And this time, I'm going to start at 1 inch and mark in a 1/2 inch. That one's not right. Can't quite see the markings. Let's see. Mark that one out. This one's good. This one's good. This one's good. And this one's good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a little squiggle up here where I did a 1/4 inch, because that is not a strip of paper that I want to use. What I am going to do is I'm going to put my ruler up beside that first mark, and with a tiny bit of space left over to the corner on this one, and I'm going to, that gives me, I don't put it right on it because I want to be able to see that I'm on the mark, and the pencil lead is going to need a little bit of space. So there I go, it goes all the way to the edge. And then using that same mark up there, I'm going to move down to this one, and I'm going to run it back down. And I would say it's probably, if you're just going to do a couple of these at a time, which I sometimes do because I really enjoy rolling my beads, is go on ahead and just mark a few of these and don't cut all of them, so that you'll know which side was the wide side last time, because if all you're left are a bunch of little dots, you're never going to figure it out. But see, this way I've got 1/2 inch wide at the bottom of these two and a 1/2 inch wide at the bottom of this triangle. So you're using all of your paper, and that is how you mark it. Then what you can do is go on ahead and cut. And I like to put the inside edge of the scissor right against the top blade, right against that mark, so that it comes out just the way I want. So that I have a nice cut. Then I'm going to do it on the other side. I'm going to start off at that edge and kind of put it so that I can see down the blade of the scissors and cut it all the way. And you just keep doing this. Now, what you're going to need to do whenever you are using, see, this is the one that had the squiggle, so I know I can throw it away. This one, I'm going to round the edges. I learned this the hard way. If you do not round the edges can be kind of pointy and can prick. And that makes it for very uncomfortable jewelry. So go on ahead and just take a little diagonal snip, just a tiny, tiny one, so that it rounds those edges. Now, we're ready to move on to our next step, which is rolling. Okay, you've got your wonderful little triangles of paper strips. Now I'm going to show you how to roll them. Okay, so now I'm going to roll an oval bead. If this were longer, this strip of paper, I could make a completely round bead, but this will probably come out as an oval. So what I'm going to do, this time I'm going to use the quilling tool, so you can see that it has a little slot in it, and you're going to work that slot along the edge into the paper, into the edge of the slot. And you can have just a tiny bit of it showing if you want to, but basically it's just to make sure that the paper, the base edge of the paper, is parallel to this little rod on the quilling tool. And what I'm going to do is I am going to roll it towards me, and you'll see that I'm using the marked side of the paper up. Whenever you are marking your paper, make sure you mark it and do your cutting on the side you don't want to have be the outside of your bead, because you don't want ink or pencil lead showing. But this way, you go on ahead and you keep the edges, which are going to go down in the same amount, you want to keep that in the middle of the two ends, so it's evenly spaced between the two ends of the paper. So I am going on down and down and down, and see how it's coming in narrower and narrower to make an oval. And then I'm down to like the last couple of inches. And this time, just because I'm used to doing this, I'm going to use a glue stick. And I'm going to press it in there, the part that's going to go against the rest of the rolled paper. And then I can go on ahead and roll it the rest of the way. And here I have a nice little oval shaped, and I'll go on ahead and round it around a couple of times more just to let it set into, the glue set into the paper. Now, when you are taking your oval bead or your cone bead off of the quilling tool or your rod, if you're putting it through something a little bit thicker, if you're going to be stringing something thicker through it, don't pull on the top outermost edge, because then it will all slog off and it will become asymmetrical. What you're going to do is put your fingernail and your thumbnail right against the very edge of the barrel of the quilling tool and then pull it off. And that way you wind up with a nice little symmetrical bead. So you can use that technique that I just showed you for oval or round beads, or even for saucer beads. But there's a different technique with the same shape of strip that I'm going to show you now, and that is for making cone beads. Now we're ready for the cone roll. And the cone roll has a lot of different functions that you can use them when making jewelry. But the big difference between the oval and the cone is that you want the outside edge to stay level. Instead of keeping it in the middle between the two, what you're going to do is you're going to stay with the outside edge. And you can just roll it on up. And there are some really cool things where after they've made them, they reshape them a little bit by bending the skinnier part of the cone. But just using these as a little cone, you can put a little pearl or on your head bead if you want to at the bottom and turn it into a little bell for jewelry or what have you. But here we are, we're down to like the last couple of inches. And again, I'm going to go on ahead and just use a glue stick because it's easy. And we're going to keep it nice and level with the outermost edge. Now see how it's making this nice little cone? You can make a bunch of these to hang off the edges of a necklace or bracelet. But again, you'll remove it the same way. You don't want to be putting any pressure on these edges because it will distort the paper that you've just rolled. You want to put it right up against that innermost portion of the paper. And you pull it off and you have a little cone. That would make a nice little Christmas tree. But there's your cone shape. Okay, so now you've learned how to make several different kinds and shapes of beads, and now I'm going to turn you loose. But I will tell you this, as you start making these beads, there are more and more beads that you're going to want to make. And with those beads, you can make all kinds of projects, just about anything you can use regular beads for. The neat thing about paper beads is that they're lighter weight and they're virtually limitless because you can make them in whatever colors you want, whatever sizes you want. So you can custom make them for gifts or for projects for yourself. We have tons of books here at the Amarillo Public Library on different kinds of bead jewelry techniques. So feel free to come and enjoy those. I mean, these are just a couple of them. We've got a bunch. But make your beads, get ready to make some awesome jewelry. And if you liked this video, and I hope you did, then please give it a thumbs up on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel because we'll be having more jewelry making videos in the future. And if you'd like to know when those are going to happen, go ahead and click on the little notification bell so we can let you know whenever we have something new online. Take care. Bye-bye.